There are days when simply walking out the front door feels like stepping into a riptide. You are immediately hit by a dense, fast-moving wall of overlapping external pressures that demand your attention. When you endure that level of constant pressure for long enough, the brain does what it is wired to do. It shifts into survival mode. You start operating from a place of deep emotional fatigue. The standard psychological response to this environment is highly predictable. We put our heads down, pull our shoulders in, and attempt to block out the noise. We isolate ourselves. By pulling away from the crowd to protect ourselves, we accidentally trap ourselves in a vacuum. We cut off the exact social connections required to alleviate that stress, locking us into a localized loop of despair. This mass isolation is a primary threat to our collective stability. Eventually, we are forced to interact. And when two people, both exhausted and operating in pure survival mode, cross paths, the friction is immediate. This friction creates a mechanical feedback loop. One person projects their defensive negativity outward. That acts as a trigger, ensuring the other person absorbs that stress and bounces it right back. Multiply that single reflexive snap across thousands of daily micro-interactions. The tension ripples outward, locking entirely separate groups of people into a rigid, gridlocked network of stress. Collective hostility is the predictable result of a system under stress. We engage in these hostilities because we are caught in a reactive cycle, even when we actively wish to avoid them. Breaking this cycle requires a deliberate disruption. It happens at the intervention point, that highly specific, brief window where you are handed hostility, but consciously decide not to pass it on. Taking that hit requires a psychological pivot. You absorb and negate energy from someone's bad day, but refuse to let it dictate your reaction. You let the hostility sink. The surrounding tension flatlines. It hits a dead end. The active phase begins when you project something unexpected into that newly emptied space. You respond with a positive action. This pivot alters your position in the social network. Instead of reacting to an existing environment, you are providing the inputs for a new one. This shows just how fragile the hostility loop really is. From there, kindness operates as a measurable social contagion. It moves through a population exactly like kinetic energy transferring across a physical network. The primary transfer occurs the instant an unexpected positive act hits its target. The recipient experiences an immediate shift in their baseline psychological state. Because their state is elevated, the trajectory of their day changes. When they interact with the next stranger, they carry that new energy forward, spreading it to entirely separate clusters of people. Then comes the tertiary effect. Passive witnesses who merely observe these interactions are subconsciously primed to mirror the behavior themselves. Kindness is an infectious, systemic energy transfer. Once released, it multiplies, often outpacing the original cycle of stress through these secondary and tertiary links. Because this contagion travels through closed social networks, it eventually folds back on itself. The kinetic energy you pushed into the system inevitably makes its way back to your doorstep. By the time it returns, the accumulated momentum has altered the baseline rules of the local environment. Mutual support replaces friction as the default setting. A measurable psychological release happens when a community stops operating in individual survival mode and begins to function with a shared identity. The amplified energy that returns to you validates the initial risk you took at the intervention point. It demonstrates that an environment, once properly seeded, is capable of sustaining its own positive loop. It is a common human reflex to look at the hostility around us and wait for it to end. We often treat a more peaceful future as something we simply pray for. The mechanical reality of social contagion suggests the future depends on present-day inputs. It is a manageable outcome of our current interactions. The peace we associate with one day is the cumulative result of these localized choices. By initiating these cycles now, we change the baseline conditions our children will eventually navigate.